And welcome to this episode of the Good Citizen Podcast. Today, I want to dive into a few thoughts on Trump's conviction. Of course, the news broke late last week that Donald J. Trump, former president of the United States, presumptive Republican nominee for president from the Republican Party, was convicted on 34 counts by a jury there in New York State. Now, in our ministry, I don't always run to address the latest political news. Like in all of life, public life, certainly in public life, the urgent can often overtake the important. And there's a culture where everyone has to have an opinion about everything. And I reject that. I prefer to come in and kind of the second round analysis where we've had a little more time to think through something, to think through what are the practical implications, what are the biblical implications. But as I was reflecting on this, taking some questions from Christians over the weekend, I preached at a church, and just thinking about the implications for our republic, for our country, I thought, let's go ahead and dive in. Primarily because this situation involves moral questions, but those moral questions are interlaced with legal standards and legal questions. So hopefully I can add a voice here as you're thinking through what has occurred, what does it mean. I hope this will be helpful to you. So I have four thoughts for you. Hopefully this will be fairly brief today. I want to keep it fairly concise. And you're thinking, oh yeah, right. Josh, I haven't to try. All right, but I have four thoughts for you. And the first one is that Trump's character or lack thereof matters. Trump's character or lack thereof matters. We've talked often of Jethro's voting guide, and that is Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, not the Beverly Hillbillies character, but he set out some qualifications for those in public office while talking to Moses, saying, hey, you need some help. Here are the qualifications. And he said that they should first be competent, but that they also should fear God, that they should be honest, and they should evidence financial integrity. And so in this matter, character matters, right? And this case involved hush money paid to a porn star, Stormy Daniels. Now, most Americans are familiar with this situation. So again, it's not new news for us, but as followers of Jesus, we can't just glance over these things. And it's important to note that Trump did not take the stand to defend his sexual integrity or anything. Now, in this country, we have the right to remain silent. You do not have to take the stand. That is not a presumption of guilt. But I'm just simply noting that this case involved hush money paid to a porn star. And it appears that Trump's legal team is more focused on the appeal than trying to make some defense here. And there has been a defense taken in other cases. That there's one particular case that involved something like this, hush money paid to a mistress, and the defendant took the stand to at least say, I didn't pay that money to interfere in an election. I paid that money to defend my family. Again, here it seems like Trump's legal team was just focused on more on the appellate standard here, perhaps being able to overturn it at a higher level. But just coming back to the basics, as followers of Jesus, we have to note that Trump did not attempt to defend his sexual integrity here, and it involved hush money paid to a porn star. Just period. That's what it involves. And so Trump's character or lack thereof matters. As followers of Jesus, we can't just glance over that. And several things can be true at the same time, but the preference in our ministry and my encouragement to you as you talk with others about matters in public life is that you can say things like this. Several things can be true at the same time. And Trump's character matters to us. I don't overlook that. That is something that I note, and it is critical. And so you can say something like Trump's character matters. And I have seen a number of memes, and many of them I think have been taken down. I was looking back through a few social media accounts today, but there was a meme going around that said something along these lines, Trump is a convicted felon, but so is Jesus. So is the person that you worship. Just stop it. Just stop it. I don't think anyone has to look at this for very long to notice the distinction. Right? Jesus was perfect. He had never sinned, and he was wrongly convicted, put on a cross, and crucified for our sins. And so comparing this situation to Christ on the cross, no, don't do it. Just stop it. All right. That is not helpful to the church. That is not helpful to the church's public witness. And like I said, I think many of those have been taken down, but those sorts of things don't help. Why? Because it looks like we're somehow brushing over that this matters. And so as followers of Jesus, character always matters. We certainly should be mindful of that in our own lives, and we should apply this to all candidates equally, but it certainly matters here. So that's the first one. The second thought I have is that this trial was a novel legal gamble. And kind of the the subtitle there is that it's especially now, especially in an election year, especially brought by a democratically elected, a member of the Democratic Party elected as a DA, right now, right in election year, on what even progressive legal scholars thought was an unwise legal gamble, because there are other cases that many progressive legal scholars would say election interference or handling of classified documents. Federal prosecutors looked at this situation, decided not to bring charges or bring an indictment. Yet Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor or district attorney there in New York, decided to move forward on it. And as I've looked at, the best I can tell, I have looked into some fact checking here. Best I understand that Alvin Bragg, as he served as Manhattan district attorney in 2022, his staff downgraded 52% of felonies that were screened to misdemeanors. And that was an increase from prior years. I did see some data that maybe other districts or boroughs have actually do more than that. But the simple fact is that the trend in his office is actually to take felonies, downgrade them to misdemeanors. And what was done here was the exact opposite. It was a decision to say that there was the misclassification of funds as legal services when actually it was hush money paid to Stormy Daniels. My understanding that paying of hush money in and of itself is not illegal. Certainly there are moral questions there, but not illegal. But saying that the misclassification of records was a misdemeanor, and then bumped it up to a felony by saying that it was committed with an intent to commit another crime. But even in the original indictment, it wasn't clear what was the other crime. And so this was a novel legal gamble. And certainly it is hard to look at this and not see a political motivation when the 52% of other felonies have been dropped down to misdemeanors, and you're bringing a case on this very, very novel legal theory. Now, here's where a little bit of my time as a public defender can come in. And I think many in the field that work in the field of public defense or of criminal defense are concerned about over-criminalization. And the old saying, show me the man and I'll show you the crime, the old kind of story about federal prosecutors sitting around one day figuring out how they could have even indicted Mother Teresa. I mean, and so it is true that like prosecutorial discretion matters in thinking through which case should I bring. I want to be tough on crime. That is part of government's job. But justice, the application of justice should be fair. It should be restorative. And in this case, certainly does not, I think, hold up to that standard. So diving just a little bit more into this, there were payments to Stormy Daniels totaling $130,000 with incremental payments back to Cohen from the Trump organization that would have been classified as legal services. There are 34 counts because there would have been 34 entries. And that's, if you're familiar with how these things work, the prosecutor is always going to try to come in and make it look as absolutely as bad as possible. And again, the legal theory was that the payment was made, it was misclassified, but then it was done with the intent to commit another crime. Now, the other crimes, and this is a big part of this case that I think when it goes up on appeal is going to be a huge concern. So it's New York Penal Law 175.10, falsifying business records, and then 175.05 says that it's a felony if it's done with the intent to commit another crime or to aid and conceal the commission thereof. But the indictment didn't even say. It wasn't until Trump's team submitted a motion to dismiss that Bragg's office clarified. And you think about due process in this country. If you're charged with a crime, you're supposed to be notified of, well, what am I charged with? And again, this would apply to any American. This is about the equal application of justice. Certainly no one is above the law, but the law also should not be used to target particular individuals either. And so the other thing that was really concerning, and I'll actually go through quickly, what were the other potential crimes? Well, it was a violation of federal election campaign law, influencing an election. So the theory being that the hush money was paid to Stormy Daniels, so she did not impact the election. But also violation of New York election law, violation of federal, local, and state tax law. But here is the most troubling aspect of this case, is that the commission of another crime, the intent to commit another crime. So the elements were essentially that the money was paid, the business records were misclassified, that Trump knew about it, and that he knew about it and that he asked for this with the intent to commit another crime. But here's the troubling thing. The intent there didn't actually require him to commit another crime. It would just be as if someone were just thinking, all right, I'm going to do this. Maybe if they're thinking it's a crime, but it's actually not a crime. And this may sound a little confusing, but the judge in this case clarified that 75.10 does not require that the other crime actually be committed. Let that sink in for a second. All that is required is that the defendant acted with a conscious aim and objective to commit another crime. So if you thought in your mind, hey, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it with the intent to commit another crime, but then you stop and say, I probably shouldn't do that. Well, you can still get convicted on that. And the criminal law, you have to understand with intent that our criminal justice system has often focused on what did you actually do? Because if we as human beings are convicted for our thoughts, we are in a dangerous place, all right? You could convict anyone under these standards. And one of the troubling jury instructions was that the jurors, all they had to find was that these business documents or business transactions were misclassified, that Trump knew about it, and that he did it in commission of another crime, but they did not have to agree on which crime it was. So, just choose one. It could be any one of these. And so this just flies in the face, in my opinion, having practiced some criminal defense law, flies in the face of due process. And as it goes up on appeal, these are some really serious questions. A couple other issues that will come up on appeal is that the Trump team asked for a limitation on Stormy Daniels' testimony. It's very salacious, detailed testimony about her interaction with Trump, arguing that this was much more prejudicial than probative. This is a common objection that you will raise. And if you're just trying to prove that it happened and that this amount of money was paid, why are you allowing her to go on and on about what had occurred? And most of, and in fact, my understanding is that all of these rulings on evidence during the trial all went in favor of DA Bragg. Including saying, hey, we don't want Stormy Daniels to be talking about the entire affair. Also asking to be able to bring in some experts, one particular expert on federal election law, that was denied. And so all of that's going to go up on appeal. So when somebody just takes to Twitter or to X or Facebook and says that Trump is now a convicted felon, we at least have to stop and say, well, exactly what kind of felony is that? What happened? And again, don't forget, character matters, but we do have due process in this country, and this prosecution was questioned even by progressive legal scholars. Is this wise to bring when you have these other cases? Let them play out, let due process occur, but to take a misdemeanor, try to bump it up by saying that he thought about committing another crime, and you don't even have to specify which one. You don't have to be an attorney. You don't have to be a judge to see that that's troubling. And it would be troubling for any individual that might be faced with allegations or charges in the future. The system matters. And that is something that whenever I was practicing criminal law, this was something we would talk about all the time. It doesn't matter how you see a particular defendant, the system, the facts, justice, due process, it matters in our society. And I will tell you, looking at this case, and again, I don't think you even have to be a judge or a lawyer. Looking at this case, these are concerning things. So what happens next? Certainly there will be a sentencing. Their legal authorities are kind of going back and forth. It's probably doubtful that Trump, as a first-time convicted offender under New York law, that he would receive jail time, maybe some house arrest or something. But generally that would not be the case. Now, it can happen where a judge looks at a defendant, says you're not being remorseful, and just throws the book at them because they're someone that's more high profile. So it's possible that could occur, but most legal scholars will say that it's doubtful that he would get jail time or that he would, say, be in jail on election day. And these are just some crazy things to think about. There was one other presidential candidate a long time ago, I think Webb Du Bois was his name, who was running from an actual jail cell while I think he was charged with sedition. So it's not unprecedented in American history, but certainly unprecedented in my lifetime, probably in yours as well. So doubt that he would get jail time, but this particular case could be used as evidence against him in the other cases that are pending, saying that, look, he's a convicted felon in New York that would impugn his character if he takes the stand. I have read some. I'm certainly not I do not focus or practice in criminal appellate law in New York. And so please take this with a grain of salt. But my understanding is that the criminal appellate division there is often considered kind of the 13th juror, because they can consider on appellate standards, their differing appellate standards. Many times the appellate court is very limited in what they can look at. And it's more, you're just looking at the law that will just violate the law. Not much discretion when it comes to the facts. My understanding in New York laws, there's a little bit more leeway there. And so certainly this Trump team is going to appeal this. So that's the thought here, that this trial was a novel legal gamble. And it is very difficult not to see it, to see some political motivation here. The time that was brought, this novel legal claim, the lack, I think, of due process. Oh, you can find that it's a felony if he had the intent to commit a crime. And it doesn't matter which one. We threw a bunch of things against the wall, just pick one, and then you can convict him. Now, I will say, my trust, in the legal system has, I certainly trust the American legal system, but there have been some things, even in more recent years. Many listeners are familiar with our appeal to the United States Supreme Court on behalf of the Cox family, and not getting relief from the courts is a very, very difficult thing. Because we've often looked to the courts, right? If all else fails, I can get this in front of a judge. But I would say, even among practitioners, that even if you can't get in front of a judge, generally juries get it right. That's generally been a thought among practitioners. And so I was hoping that the jury might see through this and say, look, we see what's going on here. Now, a jury does have a particular job. They're put in a courtroom. They're said, hey, here's your job. Here are the facts. Here's the law. You have to apply them according to the facts. That's your job. There's not much leeway beyond that. But I would at least mention that. I was hoping that perhaps with a jury trial, that cooler heads might prevail, that there might be some thought of, all right, why are we doing this? Why are we here right now doing this at this time? And so that was at least something I've thought about as well. So certainly a novel legal gamble. I certainly think it was unwise, and I'm not alone in that. Even progressive legal scholars have questioned the discretion in bringing this particular case. So that's number two. First, the character matters. Trump's character matters. Number two, this trial was a novel legal gamble. Number three, the conviction, I would say, and this is going to pivot kind of from legal to more guidance, points of wisdom. I would just say the conviction does not significantly change the equation. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not advocating for the election of one candidate or the other. I simply am trying to bring information to you, trying to provide some biblical application. You can go apply it according to your conscience. But as I mentioned, you have Donald Trump, who is a morally compromised individual. I just say that. All right, he's a morally compromised individual that has pushed more biblical policies. You think about Roe versus Wade being overturned due to the selection of justices. You think of a more pro-life approach. However, that is also in question. His stance on life has changed, certainly not as aggressively pushing the sexual revolution. Might be willing to push back on some of those unbiblical principles. And I don't think that this conviction changes that. It is still the same situation, in my view. Someone just taking to Twitter saying, look, he's got 34 counts. He's got these felony conviction now. You have to look into the question of, well, what exactly is that conviction? So I just don't see that significantly changes the equation. It's always been it's always been difficult. And we've talked previously about efforts in Iowa and elsewhere to say, is there anyone else that can help lead the party forward? But that is not the case. It appears that Trump is going to be the Republican nominee. On the other side, we've talked some about the Biden administration, and specifically a repeated push against the biblical sexual ethic. We talked about the celebration of Trans Day of Visibility on Easter. Certainly that those days fell together, but we talked about, just in my reading of it, my view of it, there was no religious symbolism on the Easter proclamation. And then there's all sorts of symbolism on the Transgender Day of Visibility symbolism, even using scripture there, but leaving off the fact that male and female created he, them. These are concerning things, and continues to push the transgender agenda when it comes to girls' sports, impacting Title IX, public schools. You think of the push to reverse Roe. These are serious concerns. I might add also foreign policy, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. You see the rise of violence and changes in the world order. These are all things we can just look at, and these raise serious concerns. So in my view, what happened this last week does not significantly change the equation. Now, I would defer to your conscience if you look at this and say, well, if this individual has been convicted by a court of law, that changes my analysis. I just don't know that it changes the moral analysis. As I mentioned, that we knew about this before. And this particular case has some serious questions when it comes to due process. Whether it should have been brought at all, it will be challenged on appeal. So again, I don't know that this significantly changes the equation. Now, it would change the equation if government standards said that Trump can't run for office. But as he's running for a federal office, he would not be barred from running for president by this New York State conviction. Even my understanding is, since he's a resident of Florida, that Florida's election law would be dictated by the state where a conviction occurs. And my understanding is recently Governor Ron DeSantis, who's the head of the Florida Clemency Board, said that he would be able to vote. So there are other trials that are coming up. Other cases that have been brought against Trump involving handling of classified documents, election interference, those sorts of things that might have some other effect on it. But the general consensus is that those trials will not occur until after the election. So the government has not said he can't run. And again, because of the due process concerns that I have with the felony, I don't know that this significantly changes the moral equation. Again, I'll leave that to your conscience. And so that's number three. The conviction does not significantly change the equation, at least in my view. Number four, the constitutional order is creaking. Constitutional order is creaking, and hopefully you can hear my attempt here to just looking at this as objectively as I can. And there is a benefit to not being beholden to one particular party or tribe here too deeply. Now, if you're running for office in the Democratic Party, if you're running for office in the Republican Party, there are very specific things that you are going to have to say, that you say right now, right? But as a follower of Jesus, as just a concerned citizen, we have the benefit of just looking back and trying to look at this as objectively as possible. And what does this mean morally? What does this mean biblically? And so number four is that the constitutional order is creaking. And I'm going to go into some specifics. Sometimes I'm not as specific on this podcast. I'm not sure. Sometimes that's all that helpful. You probably know the general principles. I think what you're looking for is, what are your thoughts on applying those principles? And so I'd say the constitutional order is creaking. Now, as you look back through American history, I often say that the American Republic's, history is, rowdy. I mean, just look back at the presidency of Andrew Jackson. As he gets elected, the people rush the White House. One of the staffers fortunately draws the crowd out with some alcohol, so he's not crushed to death. And we've had a major civil war in this country. So we've been used to, I think, very peaceful transitions of power. We have disagreements, but we're still civil towards one another. And I think we all feel that is changing, that things are becoming increasingly polarized, politicized, because our disagreements are becoming much more sharp. I think it goes back to, we've often talked about the differing view of freedom. Is freedom an ordered liberty, meaning that there is a God, that we're free to pursue what God has for us, to build a society according to God's design rather than our own? Or is it an open license, that there is no God, there is no rule, there are no rules, we're going to do whatever we want? And freedom is the pursuit of our own desires, doesn't matter what happens to other people. And so those two things are crashing into one another. And this move by the DA in New York, I think, is just another step that is showing that our constitutional order is creaking. Now, I think our constitutional order was very well designed. It was very well set up, but the machinery is being strained. It is the analogy that I would use, that the machinery is being tested, the strength of it. Why? Things like January 6th. And I do, regardless of the legal cases that have been brought, Leadership in that situation means that Trump steps up and says, "Hey, stop it." That's what it means. And I would also say that this trial should never have happened. There are some lines that once crossed are very difficult to uncross. And if what is going to happen when a president runs for office and then does something that one of their opponents does not like, and then an aggressive prosecutor somewhere is just going to bring criminal charges against the president as soon as they step out of office, that is a very dangerous precedent to set. Now, there are times that immunity should not apply. And we often say that bad facts make bad law. And we've had some very difficult things that have happened in our country as of late. But bringing a case with questionable, connecting a misdemeanor to a felony based on the thought that you're creating a crime, but you don't even have to say which one. This is not wise. Again, there are some lines once crossed that are very difficult to uncross. And I have reflected some on the statement among Gen Z. It used to be most kids would dream about being president. More of them now would say, I want to be an influencer. And so good people looking at this say, I don't want any part of that. And as the world looks on to the United States, there have been comparisons to Banana Republic. I don't think we're at that point. Hunter Biden is actually going to trial for gun crimes this week as well. And so I do still believe in the rule of law in the United States. But when these sorts of things are done, it does bring lots of questions. And when I get questions from Christians, like these are people that love the country, that want to make a difference. But when they see the weaponization of a DA, and again, it's very difficult to look at this. If that's not what you're trying to get across, don't bring this case. I mean, that if you're not ready to answer those questions, and DA Bragg just said he was doing his job, but for all the reasons we've talked about, very, very difficult set of circumstances to be able to claim that that the fact that it's Donald Trump, the fact that it's an election, it had nothing to do with it. Very difficult to claim that in this situation. And so we are devolving in our constitutional order to these high-stake power plays. And it doesn't take long. You look back into history, and there are some really scary examples of this. Julius Caesar, some would say that him crossing the Rubicon was due to the threat of prosecution. Well, maybe he should have been prosecuted. The particular example that comes to my mind is an Athenian naval officer named Alcibiades. He was a soldier as well as a naval captain, and this was during the war between Athens and Sparta. He was extremely successful. He was helping Athens win the war, and he went on a land expedition. Another individual took his ships and lost in a battle, and he was afraid to return to Athens because he was sure that they would try him for negligence, and he might be thrown in jail or even worse. And so he actually just went into exile, and Athens eventually lost the war. They lost their best general due to this sort of thing, where, again, if there are facts to a case and a prosecutor believes, hey, the law has been broken, no one is above the law, but the law also should not be used to target people. So the history of the United States has always been rowdy, but this sort of thing is dangerous. And we should be very circumspect, because it's hard to uncross a line once you've crossed it. And I have seen some conservative commentators saying, well, we should be prosecuting every Democratic official that we come across now. No. Now, this, if there are facts and it is worth bringing, then bring it. But this type of lawfare is not healthy for the future of the country. And the last thing, to kind of pull all of this together, so let's review. Trump's character matters. This trial was a novel legal gamble, should have never been brought for the reasons that we discussed. The conviction does not, in my opinion, significantly change the moral equation. These things were known before. You say, well, he's a convicted felon, but you got to at least ask, well, what are the underlying charges? What's the situation there? And for all the reasons, I just don't see a significant change in the moral equation here. And lastly, the constitutional order is creaking. And I do think that Trump is partly to blame due to he could have stepped in on January 6th. Now you have this trial happening. And for me, what all of this argues is that it is more important than ever for us to engage. Now, it's easy to look at this and just throw your hands up and say, this is devolving. It's a tit for tat. You did this, so I'm going to do this. And it's just a naked power play, just naked power plays back and forth. I was thinking some about Isaiah 3, verse 4 and 5. It says this: I will give children to be their princes. He's talking about the children of Israel, how they've gotten away from God, and babes shall rule over them. The people will be oppressed, everyone by another, and everyone by his neighbor. The child will be insolent toward the elder, and the base toward the honorable. So I understand that both candidates for president are quite old, but age, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can still engage in juvenile behavior. And as we get older, we talk about how the toys get bigger, but so do the sticks, as we whack each other with. And the American Constitutional Republic has provided incredible security, and an incredible sense of peace and calm. And our elections happen. And even if we gravely disagree with one another, there is a peaceful transition of power. That's what we're talking about. I see this as a huge, huge day, a huge development in our country. And where are the leaders? Who's going to step up and say no more? This is not going to be the future. We're not going to go down this path. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening in our public life. And so that has left me gravely troubled. One of the reasons why I wanted to go ahead and share some thoughts, and that's going to be animating my prayer that in our country, that things would return to a time. Again, American history has always been rowdy, but this sort of political and legal warfare does not bode well for the future of our country, for our kids and our grandkids. So I believe it's time to pray for our nation, and it is time to be engaged. It's time to speak up. I have done so, even though I don't want to just rush into every headline here. I do think this is a question with profound moral and legal implications, as well as implications for the future of the country. So in review, Trump's character or lack thereof matters. This trial was a novel legal gamble. The conviction does not significantly change the moral equation. In my perspective, or from my perspective, the constitutional order is creaking. So those are my thoughts on Trump's convictions. I'll welcome yours at josh@goodcitizen.us, and we will see you next week.